Hi, and welcome to this edition of Fresh Hope for Mental Health. Our mission here at Fresh Hope for Mental Health is to empower you to live well in spite of your mental health challenge by sharing insights through interviews, practical tools for living well, encouragement, and courage for overcoming all from a Christian perspective. And now, here's your host, Pastor Brad Hafes.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to Fresh Hope for Mental Health. I'm Brad Hafes, your host. Our purpose here on Fresh Hope for Mental Health is to empower you to live a faith-filled, rich, and full life in spite of having a mental health diagnosis. Oh boy, I almost didn't get all that out there. Well, we're glad you're listening today, and I can tell already I'm going to have fun talking to this guy. His name is Tim. Now I'm not finding your last name, Tim. What is your last name?
Well, my last name is Fall,
Okay.
which I usually then explain to people it's fall, like fall in, fall out, fall over, fall down. My wife always says it's fall, like the season. And even though we have those explanations ready at hand, people still
Do not get it right.
understand what our last name is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, like I probably would say fall, like fall into sin.
There you go.
So Tim is actually a judge, and he's written a mental health memoir entitled Running for Judge, Campaigning on the Trail of Despair, Deliverance, and Overwhelming Success. And he talks about and explores the exceptional stress of being a judge and the mental health crisis that he faced himself, including contemplating suicide in the context of a judicial re-election challenge. Tim, welcome to Fresh Hope for Mental Health. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. I appreciate being here and being able to just talk with you and see what we can do to bring more help to people.
Yeah.
As you put in your intro, one of the reasons that I wrote the book, and I also do a lot of speaking and teaching on this now, is because of the stigma that's attached to mental health and mental illness diagnoses, and trying to do away with that, because this is a health issue just like any other.
Yeah. It's no different. Like I told some folks last night, it's no different that if you have cancer, you have to, it's physiological. There's something wrong with the brain,
Right.
And
right. It is a brain structure and function issue, especially with my particular diagnosis. It's easy to see how that works. But one of the things that I tell people is, because others will say things like, well, mental illness is all in your head. At which point I respond with, yes, and a heart attack is all in your chest, but go see a doctor either way.
I like that response.
The thing is that actually neither of those is true medically.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah.
If you have cardiac issues, let's say you actually have a heart attack, it affects how your brain then functions. It affects your entire body. And when your brain has a functioning issue, it affects the rest of your body. It affects muscles and digestion and all sorts of things.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, as Christians and in the Christian church, we're notorious at kind of spiritualizing the brain. It's different than the rest of the body, and when people think goofy or when they do strange things, we don't understand that. Why didn't you choose differently,
Right.
I always tell people your brain is the organ, your mind is what the brain does. And if the brain doesn't function right, you're not going to be in your right mind,
Yeah.
So, well, tell me your story. What happened? And how did you come about this?
That's a great way to open up. Now, allow me to speak for another 90 minutes or so, because that's how long this answer takes.
Sure.
No, I can digest it a bit. And the background is that I've been a judge since 1995, so 28 years on the bench.
Okay.
And in California, almost always someone gets on the bench by being appointed to it. there's a judicial opening that comes up, somebody retires, somebody got elevated, whatever it may be. And so there's an opening, and someone is then appointed to that open term. But we are an elected position, so every 6 years, that's how long our terms are. Judges run for re-election.
Okay.
Now, if you're appointed, your first election cycle comes up a lot more quickly. But there I was appointed to an open seat, and that was 1995. 1996, there's an election cycle. Nobody challenges me. I am automatically reelected to a new 6-year term.
Sure.
2002, same thing. Nobody runs against me, and I'm elected to a new 6-year term. And then 2008, someone decided to run against me. Now, this is really unusual in California. We have over 1,700 judges in California, and we are state judicial officers, but we are elected within the jurisdiction of our court, which well, actually, my jurisdiction is statewide, but my court sits in a particular county, so it's the people of that county, and I live in one of the smaller ones.
Okay.
So at the time, there were I think 9 judges on our bench. We're up to 11 now. Los Angeles County has 450 judges on their bench. So what happens is, of these 1,700 judges, about 500 are up for election every 2 years because, the 6-year cycles are staggered. And nobody runs against judges. In a given election year, 500 judges are up for re-election, and about a dozen, sometimes as much as 24 judges are challenged out of 500 possible.
Now, to challenge a judge, does someone have to be a lawyer? Because I know we always think judges have to be lawyers, but I've learned that that's not necessarily the case, correct?
True. The different states have different requirements for being able to be a judge. In California, at the time that I was appointed, it depended on which of the 2 trial courts you were being appointed to. I was appointed to the municipal court, which was the lower trial court. I needed to be a member of the state bar for 5 years to be eligible for that.
Okay.
And I got appointed after about 7.5 years as an attorney, which was pretty quick. That even though you're eligible, you don't necessarily.
Right.
The governor's not looking to put a bunch of baby lawyers on the bench, but for some reason I got in after 7.5 years, and then. If you wanted to have a seat on the Superior Court, you needed 10 years. Now, after I got on the bench, I became a Superior Court judge in 1998. We abolished the lower trial court. So now, anyway, the answer is yes, you do. You need 10 years as an attorney in order to run for judge or be appointed as a judge.
Okay.
So in 2008, somebody takes a flyer at me, and this is such an unusual occurrence in California that almost every judge in the state dreads the thought of being challenged, but will go their entire career without ever having someone run against them.
Okay.
But it happened to me. And so that's the lead-in to what happened in 2008 when I faced my mental health crisis. I was challenged. I have what I now know is a mental health diagnosis called generalized anxiety disorder and my doctor said with depressive episodes. And it's not like, I just all of a sudden had that disorder in 2008.
Yeah.
I look back and I can see for years before that, 15 plus maybe years before that I had this disorder, maybe 20 years. And this, though, was such a blow for me to deal with that, I ended up getting a diagnosis. And my doctor actually said, you could be diagnosed with either anxiety or depression or both. He said, I'm not putting depression in your file. I am not going to write that down. I am writing down your other diagnosis, generalized anxiety disorder. And I asked him, so what does that mean for treatment then? He said, we treat it exactly the same in your case. It doesn't matter which one I put down.
Right. Yeah.
Medically, we're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. One of the things about generalized anxiety disorder is when doctors are looking at somebody and thinking, oh, do you have the symptoms for this? There are 6 symptoms. And if you show 2 of them, you are eligible for the diagnosis. I had 5 out of the 6.
Oh my word. Well, then there's no question.
No, I had it in spades. The doctor's just like, nope, this is what you got. So anyway, that's where things came in 2008, early in the re-election challenge. So I don't want to keep just blathering on.
Sure.
Go ahead and
No.
let me know what you'd like me to move on to next.
Well, how did it manifest itself? What was the epiphany? I may need to go to the doctor.
I noticed from the moment I found out someone was running against me that I was under extreme stress and anxiety.
Okay.
It was absolutely at the moment I found out, which was a phone call from a local reporter asking me to comment on this opponent, announcing he was going to run against me.
Oh my.
Heart racing, shallow breathing, distracted thoughts. So that came in, and those are some of the things that when people are under stress or stress to the level of diagnosable anxiety even, that's what you start to display.
Right.
So it went from anxiety with those symptoms to sleepless nights, racing thoughts that I'd wake up at midnight and not be able to go back to sleep, just stare at my ceiling wide awake with these racing thoughts of how awful things could be. I focused on worst case scenarios, and I would be up till dawn, at which point I would think, okay, time to get up. I got to go to work now. And then it started moving over into symptoms of depression. And I couldn't eat. I was losing weight. I was withdrawing even more than I usually do. I'm heavily on the introverted side of things.
Yeah,
so
sure.
having time to myself is my idea of a good time. So this was different. This was withdrawing and wanting to be isolated and not being able to interact with people. And I had 2 kids at home still, 15-year-old and a 17-year-old. And I realized that how I was behaving around the house was something that they could notice, and possibly it would start affecting them. That's what I thought at the time. I look back and I think, well, of course it affects them. That's what happens with kids. They are affected by their parents' moods, good or bad. And that's when I realized I got to talk to my doctor about this, because this is affecting my family.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. I went in and talked to the doctor, and we went through everything that I was experiencing. And he said, I didn't know I was going to get a mental health diagnosis. I just thought he was going to help me.
Yeah.
But he said, I'm giving you a diagnosis. We're going to treat this. We will address this. And I mentioned the thing about how a brain disorder can lead to other things in your body. People know that stress kills, but they don't necessarily realize how that happens. And one of the things is your immune system can be severely depressed. Your ability to respond to outside attacks on your body physically. Well, I came down with pneumonia. And if people have had pneumonia, they know what I'm talking about. But I will tell you, I had never had it before, and I have never been so tired in my life. Absolutely wiped out physically. Fatigue does not even come close to describing it. And so I came down with pneumonia. I was off work for 3 weeks. I couldn't. I did not have the strength for the first week or so to even walk around the house much. I would maybe get out of my bed and then make it to the living room and then be on the couch for hours. But when you have that kind of fatigue and tiredness on top of anxiety and depression, That is not a good combination.
No, no,
Not at all.
no. I was in the hospital for 10 days in my 20s with double viral pneumonia. Yeah,
Right?
I can relate. And
Yeah.
usually you're worn out too from the coughing alone.
Yes, your lungs are not getting enough oxygen. That's part of the pneumonia issue, of course,
Mm-hmm.
is your lungs are not able to get in the oxygen you need, which then, of course, makes you tired.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, your body is fighting infection, which makes you tired. Plus, you're coughing all the time, which
Right.
makes you tired. It's
Mm-hmm.
just
Yep.
it's a disease that comes at you so many ways to make you so completely unable
Mm-hmm.
to feel like you have any energy to do anything.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
that was the other thing that came along
Oh,
early in the
wow.
campaign. So I found out in January this guy wanted to run against me. I got the pneumonia and the mental health diagnosis both in February.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
one,
Yeah.
the thing about judges in California, we're not political. We don't necessarily have a big political background before coming on the bench. Very few
Sure.
judges do. Happily, one of my colleagues here did. He had a tremendous political background before he got on the bench.
Okay.
He's a great judge. He's perfectly suited to this job. But one of the things that he told me when I called him up and I said, I'm not going to be coming to work. I've got pneumonia. I just got this diagnosis. And he was the judge at the time who was in charge of what we call calendars, meaning he makes
Sure.
sure that every judge's caseload is covered. So I called him up. I
Uh-huh.
said, this is what's going on. And he said, well, I'll tell you one thing. If you're going to get pneumonia during a campaign, it's better to do it in February than in June. Because June was the election date.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. How
Yeah.
comforting, right?
Yeah. But it was kind of reassuring. And it's funny because solid insights like that were things that helped me when I felt that I was floundering. And people hear the word floundering and they may think, oh yeah, you're a little off balance. I was floundering like a fish that had been thrown up on the bank and
Oh,
could not get back to the water.
yes. Yeah.
That kind of floundering. Um, just the analogy to not being able to breathe from pneumonia or from being a fish thrown up on the bank.
Right.
Either way, that is a good analogy for how I was dealing with all of this. So he
Sure.
reassured me with that. That was one good thing, and he said, don't worry about your caseload. We will get it covered. In fact, I remember after the first week of being home, he calls me up and he said, so how are you feeling? And I said, I may be at a D plus or C minus right now. He said, okay. He said, stay home. You're not coming back to work if that's where you are.
Mm-hmm.
So he covered it again. End of the second week, he said, where are you? And I said, I think I've risen up a grade. I might be a C plus, B minus. He says, I'm not bringing you back when you're a B minus. You need to get well. And until you're a B plus at minimum, I don't want you in the courthouse. So
Okay.
I hit that after 3 weeks. And I said,
Wow.
okay, I think I can come back. He said, do you really think you can come back? I said, I get really tired in the afternoons. He said, okay, you come in, you work the mornings, we will cover your afternoon stuff.
Wow.
And that's what I did for another week, still recovering from pneumonia. Then finally, after doing half days for a week, I came back and took everything back on.
Uh-huh.
So it was that kind of support that really helped and
Sure.
was reassuring, but it didn't take away the anxiety. So let me talk a little bit about the brain chemistry and function thing that's
Sure.
going on, because people might
Sure.
be thinking, well, why are you focusing on all the bad things, and can't you just change your mind and that sort of thing?
I know.
You can't,
Mm-hmm.
because for my disorder, what happens is the brain, the electrical impulses and the chemical transfers from one cell to another don't happen correctly.
Mm-hmm.
In your brain, a cell releases what's called serotonin, and it goes to another cell, which absorbs it. And the serotonin moves around just like the electrical impulses move around. And when that happens the way it's supposed to, your brain functions very well.
Mm-hmm.
You feel well. You have this sense of well-being, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
But with my condition, what happens is a cell releases the serotonin, and then before the next cell can absorb it, the cell that released it takes it back. It's called a reuptake. It releases and then reuptakes. So serotonin is not flowing from cell to cell. So my mind does not go through the thought processes in a way that other people would. And this is one of the things that people would ask me, how come this is bothering you so much? Judges win these things. Whoever gets defeated, and it's true, of the 24 judges who might be challenged in a given election year, sometimes one, mostly none, get defeated for the reelection.
Okay.
They all keep their jobs, and that usually if somebody does get defeated, almost always it's somebody who had huge problems. I mean, really shouldn't be on the bench kind of thing. And somebody challenged them and off they go. So people are asking me, how come this is bothering you so much? You know you're going to win. And thinking, well, for one thing, I don't know that. I know what history tells me.
Right.
And the other is, they say, why did it bother you so much? People ask me that now. How come this bothered you so much? And all I can think is, because I have a brain disorder. You're asking why someone whose brain functions properly might respond this way. Why would it bother them so much? And maybe that's a valid question for them. I don't know. Maybe it's not. But if you're asking me, it's because I have a disorder.
Right.
So you think my thinking is disordered? Yeah, because my brain has a disorder. That's why it bothered me so much.
Yeah.
So what do we do about it? My doctor, he and I talked about some of the things that everybody talks about for stress management, of course, things like make sure you get your exercise. Well, I worked out 5 days a week at the time. Now I do 6.
Okay.
And once I got past the pneumonia, I was able to get back into my exercise. Nutrition, that was a tough one because I had no appetite.
The depression.
And the anxiety, everything was just operating to take my appetite away. I lost 40 pounds over the course of the election.
Wow.
And yeah, but my son
didn't have 40 pounds to lose.
Oh, I did. It was okay.
Oh, okay.
My BMI finally got down to a very healthy range.
Okay.
But people say, oh, well, at least you lost some weight. It's like, no, you don't want to get very sick in order to lose weight. Come on. That is not appropriate. And it's not sustainable, of course, either.
Right.
So my son, my daughter was 15, my son was 17. And my son, he's seeing me. I would like pour a bowl of cereal and not even be able to get past the first spoonful. And he sees me, he says, what you need to do is just identify the foods you can take down. Don't try to eat the things that you've just normally eaten because that's not working for you. 17 years old. 17.
Really?
And this, and so
wow.
And so I thought, okay, so what is it I can do?
The fact that he even noticed that is amazing at 17.
Right. So my kids are amazing. My daughter and my son are both like this. It's just phenomenal. So I thought, all right, I have found a couple of things that I can eat. And I looked at him, I said, I know I can drink chocolate milk, which is, of course, something I love, but I don't have around the house.
Right.
But I decided to try it because I knew I needed something. I said, I know I can drink chocolate milk. He said, great, drink chocolate milk all day. You're getting milk. And you need the calories. He said, so just drink chocolate milk all day. And he said, try to find some other stuff too. And it was weird. I started finding that there were a couple of smoothies from the smoothie store that I could get that worked. And there were like 2 or 3 things. Pudding. I could have chocolate pudding and butterscotch pudding. Those were fine. I couldn't do vanilla. Would not be able to eat it.
Yeah.
Although I love vanilla pudding, of course, like a lot of people do. But nope, I couldn't. But I could have those others. And so the fridge was stocked for weeks with pudding and chocolate milk. And there were trips to the smoothie shop. But at least I was getting some nutrition. And that's what I lived off of for a long time. So my doctor talked about, make sure you get some nutrition, get in your exercise when you can. Make sure you're getting sleep. Sleep was still tough. I had sleepless nights. Through the entire campaign, I was getting very, very little sleep. And then there's the medication. And I know a lot of people think, oh no, anxiety meds, those are just a sham. It's a scam that somebody's come up with.
Hmm.
I've had people tell me that when I say I'm
Wow.
on medication. Well, that's just a scam. You shouldn't be doing that. You should be doing these other things. And I just look at them and think, great. There's my doctor who went to medical school and did a residency
Right.
and has been treating me
Right.
for a decade and a half and gave me advice. And then there's you. I think I know who I'm listening to. Thank you so
Right.
much. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and the thing is, we tried a couple of different medications. First one that we were working with did not take, and he told me that. He said, "Look, not every medication works for everybody. We will start you with this one. Pretty common that it works well." And the thing about certain types of anxiety medications, like the one that we were trying, is you have to be on it for 2 to 3 weeks before you start to feel the effect. You increase your dosage slowly; it builds up in your
Right.
system. So we tried that one. After a few weeks, he's like, "This is not doing anything." He says, "Okay, let's wean you off of that one. You have to go off of it slowly. Then you start the new one and you start building up." And the
Mm.
second one worked pretty well. And worked well in that it took the edge off
Right.
enough to where anxiety was not affecting my functioning at the level it had when I didn't have the medication.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And there have been times since then when I've gone through extremely stressful periods, when I've had to ask my doctor to subscribe medication again.
Sure.
And one of the things that came up well after the election was my dad had traumatic brain injury. There was emergency neurosurgery. We had to move him to an assisted living place
Yep.
near from the Bay Area where he lived and where I grew up. I live outside of Sacramento now, in one of the rural counties.
Uh-huh.
And so we moved him to an assisted living place near us. I call it a cruise ship on land. This place was amazing. Restaurant style dining
Right.
and housekeeping.
Wow.
And they had program directors with all sorts of events. And there was a barber shop and a manicurist on
Yep.
site. I mean,
Yep.
so anyway, so that's where we moved him to, and he thrived. But I became the primary person,
Yep.
taking him to all the appointments and
Yeah.
handling all of his finances and all of that. And from the moment that this started in 2016, I got a hold of my doctor and I said, "I need to see you. We need to talk about medication again." So I went back on it. And I cared for Dad for almost 3 years that way.
Mm.
So I went back on it. A few months later, went off. And then toward the end of his life, when care became much more intensive and it was clear that he was declining, I went back on it again.
Sure.
In fact, that time I didn't even go in. I just called my doctor. I said, "Here's what's going on. What do you think?" She said, "Yeah, I'm prescribing meds for you right now."
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
So, yeah. And so events happen where you do that again.
Right.
And for me, it's not something that is full time for the rest of my life that I'm on the medication, but it is something I'm aware of as something I need to do. And
Exactly.
medication doesn't work for everybody. Therapy doesn't work for everybody.
Right.
Other ways that people handle anxiety and stress don't always work for everyone.
Right.
If you made a list of them, people would be able to say on that list, "These I know work and these I know don't work." And that's
Exactly.
so typical. So typical.
Yeah,
So
and
people shouldn't feel bad. Like, "Oh no, I blew it with therapy. It didn't work for me. I'm a failure." It's like,
Yeah.
no, therapy didn't work for you. It didn't
Yeah.
work for me. I'll
And it
tell you
could have
that.
even been the counselor. I
Right. Oh
mean,
man, that's a big
yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Get a good
why
match.
we get that in our heads, because if there was a simple application for everybody to do,
Hmm.
the mental health situation in our country wouldn't be like
Right.
it is. And
Yes.
the other thing is that I have often said with therapists, if it's not working, change.
Yes.
And I've
Yeah.
spoken to some therapists, and they actually thought it might not be a bad idea. But I said, what if Fresh Hope here locally would set
Hmm.
up like a night where a therapist could come, and people looking for a therapist come, and we set it up like that rapid dating thing where you get
Yeah,
5 minutes
exactly.
with this person, 5 minutes, and the bell goes off, and then everybody'd have a feel for which was the best fit. you know?
Right. Yeah. I love that. Therapy speed dating is an
hmm
awesome idea. Uh, well, one of the things I tell people who say, "So what is it you're doing this for? Why would a judge, an elected official in California, not every state has elected judges,
hmm
and some states have judges who are in elected position, and they are challenged every time an election cycle comes up, just
Yes.
like somebody
Yeah.
who might be on city council or in the state legislature or something, right? So people would ask me, why are you public about this? And I just thought, because there's still way too much stigma attached
Amen.
to mental health care. And then they'll say, so how do you know when you need to go get care, though? My advice, and just because this is what worked for me, is if you ever start having a conversation with yourself, I wonder if what I'm feeling is something I should talk to my doctor about. The answer is yes. You have just answered your own question by raising that question. Yes, make an appointment,
There you
talk to your
go.
doctor.
There you go.
Maybe it will be something different from what you thought, right? That's
hmm
fine too. Let your doctor talk about it. And people may not realize this, but doctors actually get paid to listen to us tell them what's going on in
hmm
our lives.
Yes, they
This is
do.
how they make their money. So they are happy when someone says, I need an
Yes,
appointment. I'd like to come in and talk to you about what's going on in my life.
exactly.
Um, and my doctor back in 2008 and now the one I have now are both so in tune with mental health as part of their
That's great.
role as primary care physicians. So
Yeah.
I've been very blessed in who I've had supporting me on
Yeah.
this.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, and many times the primary doctor refers somebody to a psychiatrist, but there's that they really need to do that only if it's outside of their ability to help the person because there's just not enough psychiatrists either.
Right. That's a good point. People shouldn't be thinking, well, if I talk to my doctor about it, they're going to make me go to the psych ward. It's like,
Right.
no, if you talk to your
No,
doctor about it, there's a really strong chance that that's who's going to be helping you with this. That's who helped me
exactly.
effectively. I mean, very effectively,
Right.
very, very effectively. Yeah. So talk to your doctor about it. And there are people who's like, well, I've had this pain in my hip for 6 months now. I wonder if I should talk to my doctor about it. My thinking would
hmm
be, yeah, and you should have done it after month one, maybe.
Yeah,
But
really. I
you know,
know. Boy, I relate to that.
and it's the same thing with somebody who's thinking, is this anxiety normal, or am I feeling depression, or what is it with
Right.
my thought processes? Like, yeah, go talk to them
Exactly.
about it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And so let me ask you this. What kind of real stigma kinds of things have you run into as you go about telling
Yeah.
your story as a judge?
One,
And I'm
one of them.
assuming you won. One of the
Yeah.
questions I had is I'm assuming you won.
Okay, spoiler alert. I won the election. I'm still a judge. Yeah.
Right.
so, so 28 years plus, going on 28 exactly this summer.
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, still a judge. And I won handily. Uh,
Good.
my opponent didn't even get a quarter of the vote. So people really wanted me back. That was great.
Yep.
Very reassuring. And it reminds me of Sally Field at the Academy Award. You like me. You really like me. So,
Yeah, really. It is nice
so,
to have that kind
but
of affirmation every now and then.
yes, it's not bad. But I'll tell you, one of the things, the stigma part, goes back to the election year itself. I was at church, and there were a number of people at church who were extremely supportive. They came alongside me and
Wonderful.
praying for me, encouraging me, contributing to the campaign, giving endorsements. I mean, this a reelection campaign is not free, and
No.
we had to do all of that stuff. But I also had people who would instead kind of uh, just downplay what it was I was going through. And so I'm at church one morning, and let me read you this little bit out of my book. I'm
Okay.
at church one morning, courtyard area. Somebody comes up, and this is what I wrote. How's it going with the campaign? One person asked at church soon after my doctor put me on the anti-anxiety meds. It's killing me. I'm not sure I said those words as much as choked them out. You can't say that. He looked shocked. Don't let anyone know. You need to present yourself positively confident 100% of the time. Yeah, I said, thanks. I felt chastised, which I think was his intent. So here's a person who I should be able at church, you would think.
Right.
I should be able to
tell the truth too.
Right. You ask a question, I will respond honestly, and there will be support. Now, I don't expect that everybody understands how best to support people in every situation they're going through.
Right.
But if I were talking to somebody and I said, how are things going? And they said, man, this thing is killing me.
Yeah.
I hope that my first response would not be, oh, that's a stupid thing to say.
Yeah, you can't say that. You can't feel that. You can't tell people that.
Right. So there's that. So that type of thing. And now, once I started talking about this, even before my book was published, I wrote it in 2019. And for people who like math, well, let's do this. So 2008 was the election season and the mental health crisis. And you're right, when you did the intro, there's some depression with thoughts that led to thoughts of suicide as well. During that time, it was a horrible thing to go through. So 2008, though, I win. Next election, 2014, nobody ran against me. So I'm reelected to another 6-year term. So I write this memoir in 2019 because I see that the stigma is still there. And I got to tell you, in California, it is a lot less than in some other parts of the country.
Sure.
And with people the age of my kids, it's a lot less than it is in other demographics, but it is still huge. And elected officials, how many have you ever heard say, I have a mental health condition, I have a diagnosis?
Yes.
I mean, it just doesn't seem to happen.
If we would just change one of the etiquettes with mental health issues for the providers,
right,
and they could start saying, it would break the stigma down a lot. Yes. I don't know how many psychiatrists I've had tell me privately, well, I have this. Or, usually people don't get into the helping professions without there being a backstory. And part of what people need to know is the backstory sometimes, because that gives you more hope than the medicine does. If your doctor says, I have generalized anxiety and I've been coping well with it for X amount, and between the medicine and this or whatever, that gives hope. That's why we do the peer-to-peer thing through Fresh Hope, because clinicians technically can't even do that. So, I mean, if it's that way with the very people who provide the care or the clinical, how much worse is it in the general population? You know?
Right. Yes. Well, and when I was talking to people about it, I realized I have a story. And so I started writing. I did not realize it was going to turn into a 40,000 word memoir, and it did. So then I started shopping it around. I tried to find an agent, tried to find a publisher, and anybody who's ever written something and then sends it out to see if anyone else is interested knows that there's
a lot of rejection.
1,000 pitches and 1,000 rejections. And for very few writers, one of those 1,000 will be an acceptance. And I fell into that category. I had a publisher that I had sent it to respond saying, yes, we'd like to offer you a contract. So that was late 2019, and I'm signing this contract, and all of a sudden I am looking at, okay, they're going to publish this. 2020 is my next election cycle.
Oh, yes.
And it came out before the filing period for my next election. So then there's the possibility that somebody's going to say, hey, look, this guy wrote a mental health memoir. Let's run against him for judge. We can turn this into a campaign issue.
Yeah.
And I went through that thought process, and I thought, I just don't care. Go, go right ahead.
There
This
you
is too
go. There you
important.
go.
This is too important. And nobody did. But I did have a couple of people say, you can't do that. A judge cannot admit having a mental health problem. That's unethical.
What?
Now, I have been teaching judicial ethics in California for 20 years. I've been on the bench for 28. I started teaching judicial ethics after I'd been on the bench for a while. I have taught thousands of judges in California over the years, judicial ethics. I have never once seen anything that says judges can't admit they have a mental health problem. And
good grief.
I get that, when someone says that, you can't do that, a judge can't admit that, they are talking about their concept of judges and how we're supposed to present ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah. And that there's no way that a judge should ever admit having feet of clay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course we do, because everybody does.
Exactly.
And so I think that it's important that these types of things get talked about. And if a judge can do it, maybe somebody else will be thinking, oh, maybe I can go talk to my doctor about what I'm thinking as well, what I'm feeling, what I'm going through. Maybe I can find help somewhere. And so I wrote the book, one, on the removing stigma side of things. Another is for people who don't have mental health issues themselves, as a way to provide some insight. And for those who do, as an encouragement to know that they will be able to find help and get through this. And the book is not one downer story after another. There's some fun stuff in it as well.
Sure.
But so now I have these talks. So that was a while ago, and the thing is now I talk to people like you, and I speak to different groups. I've spoken to NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I've spoken to the California Judges Association. I taught a session for the Vermont Judicial College. I've spoken to a lot of groups over the years in order to try to pursue this. Let's remove the stigma. Let's normalize seeking help for this medical condition. And let's encourage people that this is something that does not disqualify it. A mental health diagnosis is not a disqualification from being a judge. It's not a disqualification from being a pastor, from being a school teacher, from being a mom or a dad, from being a bank teller. I mean, it's just not. It is not a disqualification, because it's a lot more common than people think. That,
in fact, once you have that diagnosis and you start treating it, you're more qualified than you were prior to the diagnosis.
Right. And
I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's like, just because there's a name for this does not mean I'm disqualified or I'm not as good.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the things that I hope out of all this is for people to realize that what someone going through any type of issue, and it could be something that's physical health, mental health, it could be family, it could be relationships, it could be work. People need other people to come alongside them. Even an introvert like me we need people to come alongside. There's that passage in the Bible that we are to comfort others with the comfort that God has given us, the God of all comfort. And as you're probably aware, the word for the comfort is actually the same word or root that refers to the Holy Spirit as the Paraclete, or the one who comes alongside us. So that passage, in a more literal sense, it talks about we should come alongside other people just like God comes alongside us, because he is the God of all coming alongsidedness with us at all times. And anybody who might think they actually want to read what I've written about this will find by the end that the person who came alongside me, the real hero of this story, is my wife.
Yes, mine too.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I'll read you another little bit that from early on, where she has been the person whose faith, my faith remained, but there were times when I just did not feel strong at all.
Right, right.
And people may say, "Oh, so you're saying you're weak in your faith," and put whatever labels you want on it.
When you have
No, what
depression, that's somebody who's never had clinical depression saying that.
Well, true. Or somebody who doesn't realize it's not a matter of strong faith or weak faith. I mean, if you belong to Jesus, then you're sealed by the
Right.
Spirit. So,
Hmm.
so you've got that. But God puts people in our lives because that is often where He is acting. Right?
Right.
It's just
It's him
the
with skin
Spirit is
on.
moving through. Yes. So what happened is I come home the night I found out about um, the election challenge. I tell my wife, I tell my kids about it, and um, my wife's response, okay, we're going to pray about this. And the evening goes on, bedtime. We get up early to work out. So that's where
Hmm.
I pick up the story now. So this is the morning after I have
Okay.
just found out someone
Hmm.
is running against me, and I'm already feeling all of these symptoms, like I told you, from the very moment I
Hmm.
found out. All right, so it's the morning after. The alarm went off at 4:15, like usual. Liz was already up and in the room down the hall doing some Bible study while I made the bed. She came in and we prepared to say prayers together, just like we do every morning before heading out to hit the gym. We knelt on opposite sides of the bed. If I'd been asked about it, I'd have said up to that point that this was just another morning. Then I opened my mouth to pray. Father, and then nothing. Silence.
Mm.
My head dropped down between my arms, my forehead pushing into the comforter I'd just smoothed out across the mattress when making the bed. Silence. Nothing. Then something. My shoulders shook. My lungs expanded with a huge indraw of breath, and I cried. Not quietly
Mm.
crying tiny tears into the bed, not quietly
Mm.
crying softly stifled whimpers,
Mm.
huge heaving sobs. Huge heaving sobs that shook me from my knees on the floor, up through my belly and into my chest, up to my head, and then down my arms as I pressed them into the bed.
Mm.
Uncontrollable crying. I don't mean I tried to control it, but found I couldn't. I had no thought of control. My body was in charge, not my thinking. I didn't hear Liz get up from her side of the bed. I didn't feel the mattress shift as she stopped leaning against it. I didn't know she was coming around to me. The first I knew was when she knelt down and wrapped me up in her arms. Then
Mm.
she prayed. God, be with Tim, she began. Liz's words washed over me, her arms holding me, her prayer encouraging me. My
Mm.
sobs stopped, my breathing eased. She asked for God's presence to comfort me, strengthen me, calm me. Then she said, Amen.
Mhm. Mm.
So
You're an
throughout,
exceptional writer, I could tell. I mean, that's
thanks.
very compelling.
I will tell you this is not the first thing I've written, but but I appreciate
Yeah.
that. A lot of practice. I'm actually on the board of a group called West Coast Christian Writers,
Oh,
and we hold conferences every year.
wow.
Um, yeah, there's one coming up in a little bit. So anyway, um, thank you. But
Yeah.
that's the type of thing where Liz, uh, she literally came alongside me.
Right.
Right, right
Right.
there, kneeling
Yes.
next to me,
Yeah.
holding on to me. Now, the thing is, she is half my size.
Mm. Hmm.
Physically, her presence was 10 times my
Sure.
size.
Yep.
The presence she provided, um, and how
Yeah,
do you
and there
explain
is
it?
a
Except to
ministry of presence that
yes,
over is overwhelming. It's
yes,
almost like when if she had seen you pressed under a car and she could lift the car at that point.
right.
It's that same sort of thing.
And throughout the campaign season, these types of things keep coming up where it's like, okay, look at Liz once again.
Yeah,
she's she's the one, and like I say, she is the hero of the
she's
story.
a steel magnolia.
Yeah, she has a lot of presence, just generally, but the presence in what I was going through was tremendous.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was that type of experience that I had as I was dealing with these mental health issues. And of course, remember, that was way early on. The second day, I had no idea I had a diagnosis. I had no idea I had a mental illness. I didn't know there was something that could be addressed medically and chemically. And, I didn't know. I
Right.
just was falling apart.
Well, yeah. And then once you know, so much stuff from the past makes sense.
Wow. Yes. I can look back to the years before the diagnosis and realize, oh, now I get it.
Yeah,
I have
exactly.
context. I
Yes,
have
yeah.
understanding.
Yep,
Yes.
yep, yeah. Well, let me, I'm going to kind of switch gears here
Sure.
because thank you for telling your story as someone who holds what many people would and I would consider a well respected profession. Um, so thank you very much for telling it and being willing to risk what you risk in doing so. Because those of us who I didn't have a choice, mine was made so public. And when you were busy in 95, did you say you started in 98 or something like that as a
I
judge?
was
Or,
appointed to the bench in 95.
okay, that's when I had my
Right.
mental health breakdown.
Oh,
And
my. Yes.
it became quite public. It was a manic episode, became very public, and I was in the news for the better part of a year and a half to 2 years.
Oh, yes.
And
Wow.
yeah, which is a whole different thing and long story. But I didn't have a choice to make it public. It was made public for me. So people will say to me, "You're so brave to tell." No, I'm just telling you the backstory to what
Yep.
was very public, whereas yours was not necessarily public, and you're telling it. And I
No.
thank you for that.
Until 2019, the only people who knew I had a diagnosis were my doctor and my wife. That was it.
Ah,
And I
wow.
didn't even tell her about the suicidal thoughts, not ideations like, oh, what would happen if I ever killed myself? I mean, actual suicidal thoughts. I didn't tell her about that until I was writing this thing
Yeah.
in 2019.
Wow.
I mean, that's how closely held I had it.
Okay.
My doctor didn't know
Yeah.
about those. My
Yeah.
wife didn't know about those. And that's a mistake. We should not hide
Right.
those things
Yeah.
either. Now, do you necessarily go around blabbing, oh, hey, I thought of suicide? I mean, no, but you talk to the people.
You tell it to somebody that's a safe
Right.
person. Yeah.
Yes.
In
Yeah.
safe places. So
Right.
here's my question that kind of
Hmm.
changes the gears a little bit.
Hmm.
I teach Fresh Hope mental health and spiritual health and uh, concepts at our local county jail. I've been working for about 6 years on a curriculum for inmates
Hmm.
that don't necessarily have a mental health diagnosis, but certainly people who have emotional issues that will never, ever be addressed, un- most likely, or
Hmm.
they don't have an awareness of it. So I
Hmm.
have a real heart for the person who I see on the news because
Hmm.
inevitably they're going to end up possibly taking what I'm writing, okay?
Hmm.
And I'm working with it, and I always am so proud of the fact that I have a blue badge, which means I can go in the jail, I can move around myself, I don't have
Hmm.
to have somebody take me, etc. But now, how has this changed as you sit on that seat as a judge
Hmm.
and you look at those who are coming before you who've had
Right.
an encounter with the law?
Well, this goes back to something my wife said as the campaign was nearing its end with election day coming up. She said, one thing about this experience, the mental health side of things, she says, is it will give you more insight to understand people in your courtroom.
Yes.
Now, that's true, judges all have experiences, and sometimes those experiences are things that then also they may see with somebody in the courtroom.
Right.
A judge who's a parent might hear another parent in the courtroom say some things and recognize that as, oh yes, that's something that I as a parent have experienced. That doesn't mean judges are automatically disqualified, because if that were the case, then only childless judges could do family custody disputes, right? Yeah. So that's not how things go. But it also means I don't look in the courtroom and say, okay, of the two of you, which has had a mental health episode? Oh, you have, so have I, so I'm going to rule in your favor. I mean, we don't do that, of course.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
But in California, under our code of judicial ethics, we are required to provide accommodation and to create an opportunity in court proceedings for people to have a full opportunity to present their case.
Mm-hmm.
Although, as a long retired judge once said, everybody's entitled to their day in court. They're just not necessarily entitled to a full day in court. So, yeah, because some people, it's like, you can tell me everything on this small claims case you need to in an hour. You don't need the whole court day to do this.
Yeah.
So we are supposed to provide that opportunity. And one of the things that I can do is, maybe more than other people who haven't had my experiences, is I can recognize if someone's having what may look like overwhelming anxiety or depression or something else going on, just like I would with anybody else. Maybe just somebody who's under a lot of stress. It's like, do we need to take a break? Would you like an opportunity to talk to your attorney? Should this be a good time for a recess? I mean, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So there are those. I mean, those, but that's just what we're bound to do ethically anyway. Is if we see that someone needs an accommodation, we need to do that. If we see that somebody is trying to present their case, we need to give them not just the opportunity, like, hey, it's 9:00, this is your time, but to create a place where they can do that.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I was on the governor's advisory committee for mental health for a number of years here in Nebraska. And one of the things that it finally dawned on me, it's called behavioral health. And when your mental health is not good, or your emotional health, and I always tell everybody has emotional issues. Everybody does. And if you think you don't, I have the spiritual gift of triggering people, and I will come and live with you, and I will trigger you, or we'll figure out within about 36 hours what your real issues are. But everybody's got those things.
Right.
But the bottom line is that I have such compassion and understanding. There's a reason sometimes people do the really crazy stuff they do that lands them up in a courtroom.
Right.
Now that doesn't mean that the law doesn't apply. Then it does. I mean, I understand that, but in order to help those folks, I just have such a compassion, because let's talk about the trauma you had as a child. Let's talk about, so anyway, I was just curious as to,
When you were talking about a jail setting, of course, people think of criminal cases when they think of courthouses, but that is such just one aspect of what goes on here. I have the family law cases, probate cases with maybe people who are grieving over someone who passed away, or family who's fighting over whatever someone has left behind. And we've got civil cases where people are dealing with auto accidents, or businesses that have fallen apart, or debt collectors that are coming after them. And it just goes on and on. We see people in all of these contexts who are just overwhelmed. And there are things that we need to do on this. Before I finish up this interview, I would like to get back to something that we were talking about. You said that there are people who look at mental health issues, maybe anxiety, and how come you're thinking that way?
Right.
And I just need to reassure listeners that dealing with anxiety is not a sign of a lack of faith or a faith issue.
Exactly.
Anxiety, when I'm talking about diagnosed clinical anxiety, this is a health issue, and depression is a health issue, and bipolar is a health issue. And there are, just these are all health issues. And anybody who tries to say, well, it's a sign of a inadequate faith.
No.
One, they don't understand the medicine, so they shouldn't be saying those things. And the other is, just don't listen to them. They're full of hot air. They may not know it, but they are.
Yep. Well, there are people who haven't, one of the early church fathers, I think it was Augustine, said, never trust a man who does not walk without a limp.
Yeah.
And
everybody's carrying something.
Everybody has their big things that they think, but they until you've walked through something, you don't get it. Yeah. And I want to reiterate, not only is it not a faith issue, it's not a moral issue, it's not a character issue.
Right. Yes, people will look at you and say, oh, you have a mental illness, that means you are morally deficient.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for setting us back 200 years.
Or you have some kind of flaw.
It's just not. It's medical. Go talk to your doctor. Get friends to help you, family, or do the other things that people do when they want good health.
If you're somebody that's struggling and you're afraid to go to a doctor, or you think you should be able to do it on your own, well, my question then is, when you have a broken bone, would you just not go to the doctor then and try to set it on your own? Or if you had diabetes, would you just try to pray it out?
Right. And getting back to the heart attack analogy, are you trying to reach for the paddles yourself? That's just
plugging them in.
Yeah. Now, I have to tell you, it's been fun talking to you over the lunch hour. I got to get back to some judge stuff.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate your time so much. And for those of you who are listening, we pray that it's been a real blessing. I'm sure you can get a hold of Tim's book through Amazon. And I want to encourage all of you to leave a review of this podcast if you're listening on iTunes. And in any case, we're just really glad that you've all taken time to listen. And so between now and the next time we're together, may the Lord hold you in his perfect and complete hope, new and fresh daily. I'm Brad Hafes, and this has been another edition of Fresh Hope for Mental Health.
You've been listening to Fresh Hope for Mental Health. If you have an opportunity, please review, share, and subscribe to the Fresh Hope for Mental Health podcast on iTunes or on the service that you use. We encourage you to share our podcast on social media with your friends and family. Previous podcasts of Fresh Hope for Mental Health can be found at freshhopeformentalhealth.com, iHeartRadio, Stitcher Radio, and iTunes. Fresh Hope is one of the leading networks of faith-based peer support groups internationally. For more information about Fresh Hope, go to freshhope.us.